for the plant operator, and I can't think of his name at the moment.
Yeah.
In at Teams yesterday.
So did everybody see the news story about Shelton Planning and Zoning going into executive session and forgetting to turn off the YouTube feed? So their entire negotiation over some legal strategy was broadcast to everyone.
It was Tom Carey we were waiting for from Beacon Falls, but we're going to have to go forward in a minute.
Yeah, it's 10:05. Let's start.
Okay. Get back here.
Richard, if you just keep an eye for us, let us know if someone comes in.
Will do.
Oh, wait a minute. We got backlick in the waiting room. All right, John, let's get going.
Okay, so we're going to start, everybody. Thank you, all for coming. I'm John DiCarlo. I am Municipal Shared Services Director for NVCOG. I'm also Project Manager for the Regional Wastewater Treatment Consolidation Study. Naturally, we prefer to be in the same room with you, but we've all become adept at Zoom by this point. And I will go through the list of people we have on the call as a part of the introduction to this. From Naugatuck+Valley Council of Governments, we have myself, Rick Dunn, the Executive Director, and Rich Crowther. From Black and Veatch, Patrick Dunlap, Carla Romo, Jeff Stillman, Will Walkup, and Mario Francucci. From the Collins Center, David Colton and Sarah Concannon. And from the towns to date, what I have listed is from Naugatuck, Jim Stewart and Chris McCooch. From Beacon Falls, we don't have anyone on the call at the moment. If there is anyone on the call from Beacon Falls, please say hello. From Seymour, Anne-Marie Dragonis and Walter Royals. From Ansonia, Brian Capozzi. From Derby, Jack Walsh and Ed Abel and Drew Backlick. What we're here, if you look at your agendas, what we're here to do is really let Black and Veatch run through their technical memo number 3, which is the first part of phase 2, what they've come up with in findings, deliverables, give the towns all a chance to ask questions going forward. We also have the Collins Center is going to be doing a governance model and economic analysis for us. They will briefly introduce themselves after the Black and Veatch presentation. And I will turn it over now to Black and Veatch to go through the technical memo.
John, why don't you just have the folks from Collins Center introduce themselves now in case they need to speak or have any questions. People will know who they are.
Sure, David and Sarah, whichever one of you wants to speak.
Okay, I'm David Colton, and I'm an associate with the Collins Center. We'll be doing a full introduction a little later on.
Hi, everybody. Sarah Concannon from the Collins Center.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. And if Mario, if your team wants to introduce themselves and say what we're going to start going through in your memo.
Okay. Yeah. Good morning, everyone. It is a meeting.
Excuse me for 1 second, Mario. Unfortunately, I forgot to mention we are recording this, so everyone is on notice that this meeting is being recorded. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mario. Please continue.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, we're looking forward to giving you an overview of what we've done and what we've concluded here in this first part of phase 2. This is a workshop, so yeah, we will be stepping through this, but if anybody has questions along the way, you don't have to hold them until the end. It would certainly be good to have it interactive. there's an awful lot of material that we put together as part of this memo, and we'll try to step through it in a way that's hopefully easy to understand and get us there in the shortest amount of time. We have a couple hours, but we're not planning to take that long from our end, but by all means ask questions along the way. There'll be several of us presenting today, in addition to myself. Many of you know Jeff Stillman. He'll be presenting a lot of the material on the I&I portion of the work. I'm going to have Will outline for us towards the back end of the project how these facilities fit on the various treatment plant sites, and some others, including Patrick, will weigh in as we need to with questions and answers. So what we've done here, we haven't been together for a while, as everyone already knows, and we came out of phase one with 23 regional alternatives, and at the end where we want to go with phase two is we want to identify one, preferably at the very most two finalist recommended alternatives, but we've got to go from 23 to 1, and that's going to take a series of steps, and this is the first step, this first task of 4 critical tasks in phase two. This first task, what it did was it screened out the long list and it identified the short list. And then I'll give you the answer right now. We've gotten down to 7 regional alternatives in this first step. So we'll walk through how we did that. So basically, John and Rick and David have introduced the various teams that will be working on this. We'll just go over the phase one long list regional alternatives, and this is the agenda that we're looking at right now. And the items in baby blue here is what we've done in task 2 of phase 2, where we have developed and screened out regional alternatives. We did that. We'll look at that. We'll look at what we say in the area of I&I control. We took a look at the conveyance corridors and then the treatment plant layouts. And then we'll just highlight the next steps, what comes after this. So I think we've already done our introductions. I didn't hear you say deep, John.
I apologize for that, Mario. We do have George Hicks and Stella Morrison from DEP on the call. I apologize to them for not noting that earlier. I did have them listed. And thank you for noting that, Mario.
All right, no problem. Okay, so phase one, the long list, here they are. We identified 23 long list regional alternatives. I'm not going to give you the names of every one of them, but this table, this slide indicates what we came out of phase one with, 23 long list alternatives, and you will see that a number of them have a 2 and a 2A, for instance, and a 3 and a 3A. And the reason that's the case is because the A alternatives have an aggressive I&I reduction component associated with them. For instance, they're the same as the number without the alpha numeric, but it also has aggressive I&I associated with it. So what we did, we just kind of briefly review the methodology that we used in task 2 is we basically wanted to develop these regional alternatives, and by developing them we felt that we would understand them better, we would understand them more, and that their attributes, particularly their not so good attributes, would reveal themselves, and thereby that would be an opportunity to screen them out. And we did that development by looking at 3 steps, which are really assessments, planning engineering assessments. We took a look at aggressive I&I. We evaluated aggressive I&I. We looked at, can we remove extraneous flows from the systems, and are those measures, worthy of keeping those alternatives in, or should they be screened out? We looked at the conveyance corridors as well, and we looked at the feasibility of pipeline routes between adjoining communities, and then we did a treatment plant process and site layout analysis as well, to make a determination of whether in a regional setting we could fit treatment facilities at these sites. That information was all critical to us, and it allowed us to step through the entire process. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff, and at this time, and Jeff, maybe you can review with us what we did in terms of I&I evaluation.
Yep, thanks, Mario. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah,
Very good,
okay.
Jeff.
So just a note on aggressive I&I evaluations. As Mario noted, generally each of the alternatives had 2 I guess, 2 flip sides of the coin regarding infiltration and inflow, which is I&I. And so one is kind of a normal approach to I&I removal, which is actually aggressive in its own right. It's aggressively tackling major sources of inflow, roof connections and downspouts that might connect to the system, or even rapid infiltration. It's identifying the sources and doing point repairs and things like that. So when we talk about an aggressive I&I scenario, that's actually very aggressive. And we don't mean aggressive infiltration inflow getting into the system. We mean an aggressive approach to responding to that infiltration inflow. And so an aggressive scenario would be actually trying to reduce the average flow that's getting into the system, not just the rapid storm flow and things. It's trying to get basically all infiltration out of the system. It's trying to seal up the sewer system to the greatest extent possible. So when we did this evaluation, we wanted to compare what's a normal, relatively aggressive I&I approach versus a highly aggressive approach, and what's the best approach here for each of the communities. So to do that, I wanted to just kind of go through, some of the I&I programs and what is I&I, show a few pictures on it, give a little bit of background. I think most of you are probably familiar with it, so I won't belabor that. And then we'll talk a little bit about the I&I programs actually at the study communities, what's happening currently, and then we'll talk about what we think we could actually achieve with aggressive I&I removal, and then we'll talk about how we screen out the alternatives. Okay? You want to advance it, Mario? Sure. So in terms of identifying infiltration and inflow, the most common way of totaling up the amount of flow that's getting into the system and really understanding the nature of infiltration and inflow is through flow monitoring. Because by knowing what the flows are in the system day in and day out, what are the typical patterns from morning to evening, when people wake up and take showers, and and then there's a lull during the middle of the day and a bigger lull in the middle of the night. You compare those flows, which is what the flow kind of should be, with what's getting in during a storm event or during high groundwater conditions like in the winter and springtime. So by having flow monitors in place and being able to measure that flow, you really can quantify exactly what's getting in and talk about good expectations for what you might be able to remove. The biggest problem with infiltration and inflow is usually the peak flows. And that's why number 2 there, the major inflow sources, is usually the number one thing to target, because inflow is basically a direct connection. You know, what it might be, the storm drain is either right next to you know, a broken sewer, or there's actually a yard drain or a sump pump that's directly going into the sewer. Those sources of flow are significant, and they increase with the rainfall intensity. And the peak flows that they cause are very stressful to sewer systems, which really weren't designed to handle that type of flow. And it's the major cause of sanitary sewer overflows, basically. Infiltration sources are also problematic, and you can have rapid infiltration or slow infiltration. So the two examples that we're looking at in the photo there are actually examples of infiltration. So you can have gushers like the one on the bottom that are significant sources of flow that is probably due to a high groundwater condition, you know, so that the water can just flow into the pipe quite freely. Then the one on top is a lot more common, where flow is just leaking in pretty quickly through a joint. Now, the number 4 there, the sewer system evaluation surveys, is after you've done flow monitoring, and sometimes people put flow monitoring or group that into sewer system evaluation surveys, but I like to think of the evaluation surveys as going in and doing testing to try to find the sources. So common approaches to the evaluation surveys are doing smoke testing, where you basically put pressurized smoke into the sewer pipes and see where it comes out to identify potential sources. You can do dye testing, where you might flood an area that you think is getting into the sewer, and then identify where the dyed water comes out to confirm that yes, it's getting into the sewer, or no, it's going someplace else. And then finally, CCTV. And there's a number of different varieties of CCTV and laser scanning. I won't get into all that, but basically you put something into the pipe, like we see on the screen right now, to see the condition of the sewer, basically, and identify where potential sources of I&I are coming in. So next couple slides, I have a couple examples of how stuff gets in. And so this is, you know, a pretty common schematic that you know, I forget where it's from actually, but it's from one of the national organizations. It shows that in black text, it shows some of the most common inflow sources. So it might be the roof drain connection. You might have cleanouts in the yard that actually had the cap, you got knocked off or something like that. So with water ponds there, gets into the system. You can have a foundation or a basement drain or sump pump that's connected directly to the sewer. You can have a storm drain that's, usually the storm drains aren't connected directly to the sewer. If they are, that's a problem. It's more combined sewer system. But you can have one that passes through the same trench as the sewer, and then it leaks from the storm sewer into the, you know, through joints and things into the sewer pipe. So those can be very rapid sources of inflow. Another common one is manholes, basically where if the manhole's in a relatively low spot on the ground, then the water can pond on top of the manhole lid and get into the sewer very quickly. Now, infiltration sources are the white side, and those can be very rapid as well, but they're usually a little bit more gradual, and they're usually through, you know, broken pipes or offset joints, faulty lateral connections. Roots are a major cause because they can actually kind of create gaps for water to get in. But it's most commonly some sort of deterioration in the pipes, basically, that is allowing water to get in. And that's where the notion of trying to seal up the sewers comes in, to keep the infiltration out. Okay? This is an example of what we look for when we do flow monitoring. So basically we call them hydrographs, where we're looking at the flow rate over time, and we've got the bars of rainfall coming in from the top, basically, so you can see when the rainfall starts. And generally, like on the gray rectangle at the bottom, you have a base level of groundwater infiltration. Now that may go up and down seasonally, and usually in the summer it's a much lower rate of infiltration. In the winter, it's a much higher rate here, just because plants aren't using the water, there's higher groundwater levels, things like that. Then on top of that, you've got a white hydrograph, the base sanitary flow. And you can see how that flow rate varies over the course of a day, basically. So that usually the peak is right around 7 a.m. or so when everybody's getting ready for work and taking showers. And you have a secondary peak at around 6 or 7 p.m. when people are washing dishes after dinner. And that's a very common pattern, basically. On top of that, then you get the RDI&I, the rainfall-derived infiltration and inflow, which can be a very rapid rise in peak, and then the decline. Here it's kind of showing it over the course of a day, which is sometimes what happens. Sometimes you have indirect infiltration that can linger for 10 days after a storm event, after large events. So infiltration can be very significant. This is more indicative of an inflow event with a little bit of infiltration. Okay, so this is like, and we get into breaking down those curves when we have good flow monitoring data, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a few slides when we get into the flows that we have for each community. Here's some examples of, like, this is a sewer system evaluation survey, and trying to identify the major sources of inflow in a system. And so this is what it looks like for some of those direct connections that we'd identified with the yard drains and the roof leaders. And the upper right photo kind of shows a schematic of what it's like when that we pump the smoke into the sewer. And so that manhole's full of smoke, and it finds a deteriorated spot in the sewer pipe that then goes out through the storm drain and actually comes to the air. So basically the crews go around looking for where smoke might be coming around in the neighborhood. They'll block off a block long area and just fill it with smoke and see what happens. And when you get to old neighborhoods, it looks a lot like that house in the lower right-hand corner, which is a major source of inflow there. Okay. So just looking at what's been done in each of the communities in recent times regarding identifying and doing sewer system evaluation surveys, Derby's actually been the most active in recent years, largely because of the consent decree. They had a large period of neglecting the sewers, but they stepped up and have been doing quite a bit of activity. Starting with SSES, the surveys in 2016, 2017, and a little bit of planning before that, and are now actively engaging in projects to remove, started with inflow sources and are moving into some of the infiltration and storm drain connections right now. So it's a very active program, hoping to see some reductions in the peak flow come out of that. Kind of still waiting for the flow data to catch up with it, basically. But so that's some good news. Ansonia and Seymour haven't been as active. Basically, there hasn't been a citywide I&I program in over 15 years in either of the cities. And all three of those communities, Derby, Ansonia, and Seymour, when we looked at the monthly operating report data, they have excessive I&I. That we can see high peaking factors. I'll talk about that in more detail in a bit. Beacon Falls is, we don't see a need for aggressive I&I there. There is I&I when we look at the graph. We'll see that in a bit. But generally speaking, the system is newer there. It's not as deteriorated. It's not as urgent to take care of some infiltration. And Naugatuck has done some sewer system evaluation surveys in the past, and are basically, it was put on hold, and they're in the process of reprocuring services, the professional services and operations, and that's going to include the I&I program. So that'll be resuming activity here shortly. Okay. So the best flow data that we have at the moment for each of the systems is from the monthly operating reports. So I'm going to go through a graph for each of the systems. I'll just note that we have put flow monitors into the systems, especially into Derby, Seymour, and Ansonia, to look at the breakdown of flows, get hourly flows and actually 15-minute flow rates in those systems, which we think those are going to be the most beneficial in terms of understanding the flows for doing the alternatives analysis later. That's going to take place more in refining the short list of alternatimes because the flow monitors are still in place right now. Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
I just want to ask, we were waiting for this spring and trying to hustle around before COVID to get in additional flow monitors before spring rains. Did that happen? When did that happen? Can you give us a little info?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact date that they got in, but we did get them in basically in April. And so they've been in April, May, and are in the process of coming out now, basically. So we've had them in for a couple months.
Jeff, they were installed around the middle of April, and we just took them out this week. And so the analysis is just starting, Rick, on that. I mean, in general, just the general word on it is it started kind of wet, but it ended very, very dry. So the first several weeks we did get some wet weather that was hopefully reflected in the monitors, but the last 5 to 6 weeks have been dry. So we kept them in there for 10 weeks.
But you feel like you're going to have valid data from that study?
It's going to give us a lot more than we had before. We'll just see how much it really provides. But we're very grateful to the communities to help us get those in.
Yep.
Walter and Seymour and Ed and company and Derby and Brian and Sonia.
All right. So so we will be using that flow metering data for refining the short list, basically, and doing a closer look. For this analysis, the best available flow data for each of the communities was the monthly operating reports, which many of you are probably familiar with, but it records the flows and the various discharge rates and chemical testing and whatnot. But we looked at the minimum, average, and maximum daily flows and plotted them over a 5-year period here, basically. So, so these are daily. It looks like it's highly variable, and it is. You can see the variation from wet season to dry season. And the best way of looking at that is looking at the green line here and seeing how that goes up and down. The areas where it's higher is generally the winter time. It's winter and early spring. It usually peaks around February. And so that's, if we went to the low point of the green line, that's basically what we would call average dry weather flow. So in this case, it'd be right around 1 MGD or so for Derby. And then the daily maximum is the orange line. And we can see that it peaks out at 10 at the maximum reading, and then there are many readings kind of later in the period that get close to 10. Especially in 2018 was a relatively wetter year, so the green line stays higher. We have more peak flows at that point, and what we're hoping is those orange lines, which are current, in this graph, they're peaking around 9.5 or 10. With the inflow reduction program that's been taking place, you can see that towards the end of the chart, we don't see any of those peaks after December 2019. Still, just keeping our fingers crossed that some of those peaks have been removed with inflow reduction, but we just need to wait and see on that. It's obviously not enough time to tell for sure. But based on that peak of 10 and an average of 1, or an average dry weather flow of 1, that's a 10-to-1 ratio of the peak flow to the average dry weather flow, which is very high. So it's an indication of a major I&I problem. Okay.
Jeff, one more point here is that these flow measurements are being provided by the flow meter at the treatment plant, and that flow meter does sort of reach a top end limit at 10 MGD. So these peaks could actually be even higher. Is that correct?
That's a good point.
Okay. Next one.
Yep. All right, so Ansonia, it's a little bit easier to see the green line in Ansonia, and you can really see the seasonal trend here and see the higher flows in 2018, 2019. The reason that Ansonia looks like this is that there's the influent pump. So if the pump doesn't run for some time, then the minimum flow is 0, and that makes it a lot clearer to see the graph. Similarly, the peaks are often very similar, right around 6 MGD or so, and sometimes it's a little bit higher, a little bit lower, but that's generally because if that pump goes on, it goes up to 6, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. And so in 2018, the wetter year, you can see it goes on basically every day. That's why that line stays very high there. But it's hard to tell for sure about the peak INI rate. The average dry weather flow, if you look at like September 2016, that low point in the green graph, that's around 1.1 MGD, similar to Derby in a way. And then the peak flow is around 6 to 7 MGD. So it'd be peaking factor of maybe 7 or 6. Because that's pump driven, we don't know the actual peak flow in the system. Basically, the flow could be backing up in the interceptor upstream of the plant. There's some storage in that could be helping to manage the peak flows. That's where the flow metering data that we have from the spring is going to be helpful to identify some of that INI behavior. But regardless of that, even if it's a 6 or a 7 peaking factor, that's still excessive. And so inflow reduction is going to be needed, and certainly infiltration as well. Okay. Seymour is a little bit better of a picture here. You can see the green very clearly. It's interesting that there's quite a bit of variation in the green line, which kind of indicates that there's a long-term infiltration component, basically, meaning that when the winter, the groundwater levels go up higher, there's probably some low-lying interceptors that are receiving a good deal of water, and that's one reason for that variation. That's not necessarily the case, but that seems to be what's happening to me. The peak flow is it's a much lower peaking factor normally. You can see like the normal peaks are kind of in the 4 to 5 MGD range. We had one very large event in February of 2016 that went up to 7. But didn't really see that happen again. So that might have been an anomaly. If it was 7, that's a pretty high peaking factor because we have an average dry weather flow of about half an MGD. So it's a very large peaking factor. But if it's 5, well, it's still a high peaking factor. That's about 10. But I don't see some of the rapid spikes. But there's still certainly an infiltration inflow problem in Seymour. I don't want to undersell that. It needs to be resolved, and it's a high factor, but it's a much more stable looking graph here. Beacon Falls, the peak flow is a little bit more erratic day to day. It's a smaller plant, so that's kind of expectable. The average flow is around 0.2 to 0.3 MGD dry weather. There's variation, but it's a little bit more random. You don't quite see as much of the seasonal influence. I mean, you do see a peak in January of 2016, peak in March of 2017. So it's seasonal, but this is generally what a somewhat tighter system looks like. You can see that there is, peaking that's coming out from storm events and groundwater, but it's not as highly noticeable as the other systems. That's why we say it's not a strong candidate for aggressive INI removal. And then we've got Naugatuck. We had a longer period of record here. Was somebody going to say something? No, okay. And we also have much higher flows, with a good deal of variation. So the green line is actually quite variable over time, as is the orange line. So it's much harder to interpret this, but there are significant peaks. And if we look at the low points of the green line, or the low average points, it's around 4 to 5 MGD. And then we have peak flows up around 20 to 25 MGD. So that's not as high of a peaking factor, but it's quite high for a larger system still. And I should note, yeah, Naugatuck is also under consent order, related to flows, and so they'll be doing more activity with the new operations procurement coming up. Okay, so with that background, wanted to talk about, okay, now we need to decide whether to do standard I&I management or aggressive I&I removal. And I want to just reiterate, standard I&I management is still, it should be aggressive. There are problems here that need to be resolved. Aggressive is a different level here. So what do I mean by standard I&I management? Well, usually we're targeting the peak flows. We are targeting infiltration, not just inflow, but really targeted on the rapid infiltration, trying to get that peaking factor down, trying to get capacity into the system, or capacity in the system. Usually the repairs are point repairs. It's a little bit more of a find and fix of focusing, like find the sources and control them. So it might be through the smoke testing, like the photos that we saw, or finding defects through CCTV, and looking for those inflows or infiltration sources, doing a point repair to seal them. If there's too many point repairs in a given line, then you might line the whole pipe or replace the pipe, but not looking at doing the comprehensive sealing of the system, which is what we would be looking at in aggressive I&I removal. Aggressive I&I removal is going to target not just the peak flow, but really target reducing the average flow. And the reason that aggressive I&I removal is often done to try to remove that, get down that average flow, is if the plant capacity is borderline. So if you're looking at a potential moratorium on development because you don't have adequate plant capacity or something to that effect, and a large plant upgrade is in order, then aggressive I&I removal can be cost effective to make that capacity available without having to do a plant upgrade, basically. It's usually in the case where there's higher infiltration. The way you do that is by doing comprehensive rehabilitation generally. So you go in and you try to line every pipe in your leakiest basins. And you don't just line the pipe, you have to get the connections, make sure that there isn't flow coming into the laterals, and often even focus harder on the private I&I sources. You might need to line or replace the laterals, have an engagement program with homeowners and things to get better control of private I&I sources. And the contrast there is in standard I&I management, you're focused on private sources to the extent that you have rapid infiltration inflow sources, like from the roof leaders and things, as opposed to trying to actually help rehab each lateral. So some of the methods, I just wanted to get some photos so people could kind of see, like the CIPP, cured in place pipelining, is a very common approach where you don't have to dig as much with it, and you can just line the sewer pipe, and it's a good way of basically doing the entire pipe and making it into a relatively seamless pipe to help keep out I&I. So that's a common approach in comprehensive rehab programs. So is pipe bursting. Pipe bursting is more common in cases where maybe there's too many offsets, like the pipe was in quite bad condition. The CIPP just follows the alignment of the pipe, whereas pipe bursting can actually help correct some of the issues. It requires a little bit more effort. Pipe bursting is also good for bringing in additional capacity into the pipe because it can go up a size usually. Open cut is kind of, you just dig and replace the pipe. That usually leads to the best quality, but obviously it causes a lot of disruption in the process. And then you've got horizontal directional drilling, which is a way of putting in new pipes as well. So those are some of the methods. When looking, I mean, there's a lot that we can talk about with managing private I&I from houses and things, but one of the more common issues is, well, where does the dividing line between the home and the system and the public right away start? Some systems manage just the public sewers and say all parts of the lateral belong to the homeowner. But some say, well, you know, when you're into the right of way, that lower lateral, you know, you don't want to be tearing up the road to fix the lateral all the time. So a lot of systems take over management of that part. And then there's the part that goes through the yards and things. Managing that upper lateral is often one of the larger sources of I&I, and it's one of the dicier things to try to manage. So you have to think about what are you know, the guidelines and regulations, you know, building codes and things associated with that, so that it becomes a more comprehensive management approach when you're trying to manage private I&I. Okay. So based on some of that discussion, you know, we definitely see infiltration and inflow in each of the systems. And we definitely need to be doing I&I reduction. But largely because each of the alternatives is requiring plant expansion, plant combination, and trying to consolidate plants. Plus the fact that we don't have in-depth flow monitoring data, and there hasn't been extensive I&I reduction programs going on, so there isn't much of a history in each of the communities. We didn't see a strong rationale to do the aggressive I&I removal. We think that a moderately aggressive program in the base scenario is going to be enough to reduce the peak flows, and you know, and not lead to further deterioration of the system. Didn't see much of a need to increase the available capacity of the system because we would be doing plant work as well. So that would just increase the costs significantly to try to do comprehensive rehabilitation. So for that reason, we said, okay, we can get rid of those alternatives, I guess, for aggressive I&I reduction. So that kind of closes out that part. Is any questions or discussion people have?
Okay. All right. Well, you can continue to think about these things, and we can have more discussion on this at the end or along the way. So let's go into the second part of our evaluations that we did, and we're going to focus on the conveyance corridors next. And again, the conveyance corridors are going to basically be the umbilical cord between communities that allow a regional alternative to be created. So we're going to review very quickly some things about the phase 1 conveyance corridors. We'll look at what we did in terms of overall feasibility review of them, give you a highlight of some of the development that we did on the routes, and then how we evaluated them.
Mario, could I just ask you,
Yeah.
can you just go back to the last slide on the INI, on the prior slide to this one? So can you just give us a sort of a simple explanation of why these were eliminated? I mean, obviously, I'm assuming it was because of the INI, but is it because the cost was higher, because you determined it was too great to deal with it, or because the others provide better solutions versus INI? Because I'm not sure that any of them actually eliminate the need for INI.
Right. Yeah, first of all, and I hope I'm not being repetitive here, but there's absolutely no question that we believe that I&I control, and I'm talking about a robust plan of I&I control, needs to take place at all of the communities. It is aggressive I&I control that is different, and in my words, the way it's different is that aggressive I&I control addresses each and every pipe, each and every foot of pipe within that collection system, and also the private laterals. So, so we're saying that is what's, it's the alternatives that have that feature, aggressive I&I control, that we believe do not need to be carried forward. However, I&I control needs to be, and I'm talking about as it's being planned in Derby right now. To our understanding, Derby is undertaking I&I. They've done their evaluation. And we can talk about them a little bit more in detail. Maybe I'll just provide a little bit of a highlight right here. In 2019, they did 2 I&I projects, to our understanding. We spoke, and Ed and Jack, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they basically corrected locations where there was very strong inflow, and then for phase 1 of the 2019 program, and then for phase 2 of the 2019 program, they addressed more inflow and then also infiltration. They are now underway in 2020 to basically wring out infiltration in pipes in their system, and our understanding is that they will continue this for at least another 10 years. So we believe that type of a program should be undertaken at all of the communities.
So,
okay, it is a.
But just let me get a clarification as we're looking at this slide. So I'm trying to understand, and I think this is important. So if I take alternative number 6, for example, Derby to Seymour and Ansonia versus 6A, which you've eliminated, Derby to Seymour and Ansonia with aggressive I&I reduction. So are you eliminating it because you think 6 is sufficient, or are you eliminating it because 6A is too expensive?
I think we're eliminating it because number 6 is sufficient, but also we're not really sure that 6A is what we don't really know right now because of the limited data that we have from Ansonia, from Seymour, from Derby. What could we really achieve with aggressive I&I? Usually aggressive I&I, it's a foundational process. You implement conventional I&I control, and then you do post-monitoring. What has that allowed us to remove? We have now removed 20% of our total infiltration and inflow. That's good information that allowed decision makers to say, we want more. We're now going to implement aggressive I&I and get that level up to 40%. So in our case, we're really at 0, and we're saying we're going to go to 40. We need that intermediate step where we've already done work. We can see what that work has allowed us to accomplish in terms of renewal, and then make a judicious decision that says we can do more and we will do more.
Okay.
And we just don't think we have that. We can't just artificially draw that line. So we're saying 6 is sufficient.
Thank you.
And
okay.
I think from a just to interject from the facilities, perspective, we were able to show that there's room on site to handle the consolidated flows at these different facilities. In the case of Ansonia, not necessarily with process intensification. In the case of Derby, it's more constrained site, so there need to be some process intensification. And I think the difference between the normal I&I reduction that needs to be done and the aggressive I&I is a big cost difference. And since it's not necessary to do the treatment at the sites, that's, I think that might be oversimplified, but, we can do the treatment without going to this very expensive, additional I&I control. And, what I saw, at least from the facility, from the, water coming in, what we need to treat, there's the difference in peak clean factors from average to max is high, but it's not extremely high, whereas there's these very large daily peaks, which I think is more Jeff's area, but there's a good chance you could probably get a lot of that because it could be potentially inflow related, and it could be, controlled with less aggressive I&I reductions. Is that approximately right, Jeff?
Sorry, yeah. I think that's right on.
Thank you, that's helpful.
All right, thanks. Okay, so we're going to review what we did on the conveyance corridors here next. And one of the things that we did in phase one was we located our pipeline routes along existing right-of-ways. A lot of you already know that, but it's it's important to point that out again today. You know, particularly between Beacon Falls and Naugatuck, but not exclusive to them. We also did this at other locations where, for instance, Beacon Falls was flowing south to Seymour, etc. What we usually like to do with pipelines is we like to, if there's no straight way to get there, we engineers and planners like to think that it is possible and practical to locate those pipelines within existing right-of-ways. Basically, align them within infrastructure that's already there. And that's very beneficial. If we can do that, it allows for easier engineering and design, it allows for easier construction, and it allows for easier maintenance. Everybody would say, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do it. What we did here in phase two was we looked at the viability of that. We actually tried to make contact with the highway department, with Metro North, with Eversource, and we relied on Black & Veatch's experience in all of these areas, which is pretty vast as well. And as I pointed out in the report, Route 8 for the highway department is, you know, on paper, everything is possible, but when you get right to it, they're very protective about not sharing their rights of way. And not because for any other reason, but paramount to them is safety. Safety of the traveling public. Everybody on this phone call, everybody on at this meeting would applaud that. And so they're concerned that even a pipeline that could be 6 inches, 18 inches in diameter, way off to the shoulder, way off to the edge of the roadway, in the shoulder, in the grassy area, could somehow impact their service to the public, safety to the public, movement of traffic. And to the point where we've even discussed this with Jim Stewart, because we knew that it wasn't looking good, that we can place the pipeline route within those rights-of-way of the highway and the Metro North Railroad. These images that we're showing in this slide are in the segment between Beacon Falls and Naugatuck. You can see the river flows between those two rights-of-way, the railroad and the highway. What I know is very well known to all of you, but to us as well now, is that the right-of-way of the railroad is also a very narrow right-of-way. There's not a lot of room there. You know, we've read the articles, we've listened to the podcasts of expanding the Metro North Railway line and the benefits that it would have on the traveling public further south, and just the overall vitality that it could do to the community, to the system. So it's already limited, but we still wanted to see if there was a way of placing our pipeline route there. We also looked at the Eversource transmission line, which is the image on the right, which is through the state forest. And we discussed that with our T&D group, our transportation and distribution group. That's all they do is they deal with very high voltage transmission and distribution projects, working with the likes of Eversource in the Northeast and others. And the takeaway to us was that the Highway Department also has a manual that basically states that that they would only allow, because we're not just crossing these easements. Remember, we're not just going across them. We want to share them in a longitudinal manner from north to south, from miles on end, because that's the distance between Beacon Falls and Naugatuck. And the answer to that from their own manual is no. They will not allow that. They would allow it if it's actually proven that there is no other alternative. They would consider allowing sharing of their right-of-way if it is completely proven that there's no other alternative. And so we basically looked at it and we basically said, we're no longer going to go forward thinking and communicating that the rights-of-way of the highway, the Metro North Railroad, or the Eversource transmission line system is going to basically be open for sharing of utility lines. So this was, we not only looked at it locally, we looked at it regionally, we looked at it nationally, and we talked to our own experts in-house. And so we came away with that conclusion that the right-of-way access, I used the word almost impossible. I almost took the word almost out, but we felt it is literally impossible to go forward with this study and leave the idea out there that we can share their rights of way. So that's the first thing that we did as we went into the conveyance corridor evaluation.
Mario, if I could ask a quick question on if you can just go back to that illustration, because it'll help point out. A lot of people will ask, and you've said it really falls back to Eversource's guide and policy that they just don't want to share the space at all. You'd understand why a highway or a railroad wouldn't want to share space, but in this case, the lines are above ground, far above ground, and if you could talk a little bit about the fact that it really is just their policy that gets this through, that prevents it. You would think that there is no, if you could easily prove there is no other viable alternative than putting it in the ground underneath power lines. But I'm just, it makes a lot more sense that the Highway Department or the Metro North Railroad wouldn't want to share space due to safety concerns. But in this case, we're talking about using the ground underneath their power lines. So if you could just talk to that a little bit.
Mara, before you answer, I just want to have you also in your answer clarify two things. The Eversource line, I believe, is regulated by the FERC. So that might be a whole different ballgame. But
yes,
you didn't actually contact anyone at the state DOT or at the state of Connecticut at any level of government to confirm that they would not allow using the Route 8 corridor.
we tried real hard, and we including Jim Stewart and his people, tried to indicate to us who we can contact, because that would have been the proverbial nail in the coffin, Rick. But I still believe what we said. But to answer your question as succinctly as possible, we did not make contact with a human voice on the other end. Okay. But we believe what we said, and we wouldn't have said it if we didn't believe it. So regarding Eversource, John, I mean, I think all of us that know what electrical utilities go through know very well that they receive tremendous scrutiny from the public. They receive tremendous scrutiny from the public whenever they try to raise their rates, whenever they try to make a change. They operate, as you know, differently from the Highway Department and Metro North. They operate for profit. So there's a little bit of an extra set of criteria that they operate with. Many times, they look at decisions that they would embark on with the long-term view. For instance, Eversource is Eversource today, but who knows what they might be tomorrow or in 10 years from now? Would they sell this? Would they sell this part of their asset? And how would sale of their asset at that time be perceived and in terms of worth to a potential buyer if that potential buyer also says, there's also a sewer line along that easement? So there's a lot of factors, including the public scrutiny and overall other business decision basis that they use to make decisions. And we reviewed this with our folks that know Eversource, and that's the conclusion that we made. But again, it wasn't a cakewalk either. It's not as you'll see, this would have been an easier, do I say easy? No, absolutely not easy, but it might be a little bit easier to locate it, in the ground of this transmission line easement, but still not easy.
Yeah, I just want to note for everyone, we're about halfway through the allotted time for the meeting, so.
Yep, we'll keep going, yep. All right, so what we did was we said, okay, well, we did a kind of a pipeline routing analysis. We started developing these pipeline routes. We took a look at the physical attributes of them. We identified the length. We came up with approximate sizes. We took a look at topography, and we said, hey, do we need pumping stations? If so, where? We took a look at topography. We took a look at geology. We looked at environmental. And the information that we used was, at the bottom of this slide, there's so much great information on the public domain these days. The Connecticut GIS data is just very admirable, even from what we've seen in many other places in the country where we work. Great information that we were able to obtain from there, and also the satellite images that we're able to pull information from. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to walk through very briefly what we did for each of the pipeline corridors, and I'm going to identify the conclusion that we drew. So for the Beacon Falls to Naugatuck connection, we start at Beacon Falls, we go to Naugatuck. How do we get there? We basically have a common alignment going north from Beacon Falls, as you see on this slide, taking a look at the image on the left, and then we break off into two routes. We have Route 1 in red, and then we have Route 2 in navy blue or black, I can't tell which right here, going straight up to the Naugatuck plant. And some of the statistics are shown on the right. The Route 1 is a total of 5.3 miles. Route 2 is a couple of miles shorter, 2 whole miles shorter, at 16,005. We're taking a look at pipelines that involve both gravity and force main for Route 1, and for Route 2 we have gravity and force main, but that straight pipe is a tunnel. We need a tunnel to get through there. And so let's kind of go back and forth on the right side. Let's take a look at some of that topography that we're showing on the bottom. You can see I don't need to tell anybody from, I guess, in the Naugatuck Valley what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with a mountainous terrain. We're not dealing with a hilly terrain. We are dealing truly with a mountainous terrain. That area that is within the red line is pretty much Toby's Rock Mountain. We need to get around it. That's how come we chose that circuitous route. You can see the profile on the right where we have 800 foot of climb pretty much going from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck along Route 1. That is only going to be accomplished with pumping. And we've identified 5 pumping stations that will be needed to bring wastewater from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck vis-a-vis Route 1. We've identified, the good news on Route 2 is that it's shorter. We need a tunnel, it's shorter, and we can also do it with fewer pumping stations. That was very attractive to us. So we said, okay, so should this be brought forward? And this is not information that, I'm saying it like it all happened really quickly at Black and Veatch, but it didn't. I can assure you of that. At Route 1, we did apply some costs to the tunnel. And the cost of the tunnel basically killed Route 2. We're looking at, just in terms of a budgetary cost for the tunnel portion only of Route 2, we're looking at on the order of $50 million. That's with construction, and that's with an allowance for a lot of geotechnical work, engineering, construction support, and contingency. So the cost allowance just for the tunnel portion of Route 2 is on the order of $50 million. We kind of know the wastewater treatment plant at Beacon Falls and what a good, a good comprehensive build out of that would be. Nowhere near $50 million. So while we basically said Route 2 is out. We took a look at Route 1. We're not dealing with a tunnel, but we're dealing with a lot more utility there. We're dealing with 2 miles more of pipe. We're dealing with 5 pumping stations. And while we don't have a well-defined costing, even on planning level there, the more we looked at it, we felt that Route 1, what we're doing is we're delivering wastewater from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck each and every minute of each and every day. And it needs to be done reliably. We don't want spills, we don't want overflows. 5 pumping stations along a pipeline route that's long, no matter how much redundancy we build into it, we determine that it is not reliable. Route 1, no matter how good the engineering would be done to it, we felt that it is not a reliable option from a technical perspective. And as a result, Jim Stewart, definitely, I know you're on the phone, on the call here, we felt that going from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck is not viable. And that's what looking at this detail allowed us to do. Does that mean that there are not other drivers? Sure, if you want to continue, working together, absolutely. But we felt that the conclusion that we made from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck is that it should not be brought forward to the next round. I'm going to take a look now going from Beacon Falls to Seymour. Beacon Falls to Seymour, again, we looked at 2 routes. There's a common route going from Beacon Falls south towards Seymour. Route 1 is the portion in red, and Route 2, the portion in navy blue or black. Again, I can't see, but close enough to get from the midpoint all the way to the Seymour plant. These pipeline routes are even longer than going from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck. We're probably a half a mile longer on Route 1, and we're substantially longer on Route 2. And the same as for the north route that I just described, we need both force main and gravity pipes to go along Route 1, and Route 2 is shorter by about close to a mile over Route 1, but we're doing that with a tunnel. And that tunnel is going to be even longer than the tunnel that was described for Beacon Falls to Naugatuck. Guess what the cost will be? It will be higher. That tunnel will cost even more than the tunnel that I identified for Naugatuck. From Beacon Falls to Naugatuck, we put that on the order of $70 million, that tunnel. So Route 2, again, is out for in terms of cost, going from Beacon Falls to Seymour. And we have even more pumping stations here from going on Route 1. And again, from a reliability perspective, we just did not feel that the reliability overall to deliver wastewater, we're not dealing with a forgiving liquid here, like drinking water. We're dealing with wastewater. It likes to clog pipes. It likes to clog pumps. It likes to break down pumps. It likes to break down pipes. So we felt that type of liquid raw wastewater would not be delivered reliably from Beacon Falls to Seymour with that type of pipeline and 6 pumping stations. So again, we felt that Beacon Falls to Seymour regional alternative should also be removed from further consideration. I should also say this: if the Beacon Falls plant itself is so small by comparison, that if it was a larger facility, it would, and the cost to upgrade and expand that facility was starting to come close to the order of magnitude of the conveyance corridor themselves, maybe a harder look would be in order. But because it is so small, and because the pipeline routes are so expensive and or so unreliable, we felt that Beacon Falls, Seymour, and Beacon Falls and Naugatuck should be regional alternatives should be removed for further consideration. Going from Seymour to Ansonia, we're a lot better here. We got pipelines that are close to 60% the route. We've got only 2 pumping stations. We've got pipelines that are much more manageable in terms of size. We feel that this is a we did not conclude that this was not doable. We felt that this was doable, and therefore by right should be maintained. We could not kill it. We did not kill this alternative, Seymour to Ansonia. And then from Ansonia to Derby, or from Derby to Ansonia, it gets even better. We're dealing with an even smaller pipeline route. We're dealing with 8,000-foot line. We're dealing with force main and gravity pumping, only 1 pumping station. We felt that this is also doable. And you know what we did was we took a look at multiple routes. We only showed 1 here, but as we say in the report, if there's a desire to push the pipeline into a parallel street, and I think this one here, I don't know, Carla, is this one may be along Water Street or Caroline Street. If we want to go over to the next street over, we can do that. So this is also an alternative that would make it into the finalist round, into the shortlist round. And so what we did was we concluded that after the conveyance corridor assessment, we removed the alternatives that go from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck and Beacon Falls to Seymour, and we were able to cut 4 more alternatives from the group that were cut in the aggressive I&I evaluation. And that's what I've got to report on this second series. Any questions here?
Is there anyone from the towns? I obviously I do, but if anyone from the towns has a question, please go first.
I have one as well, but I'll let you go first, Rick.
So, so Mario, we've had this conversation before, and I understand the point of view in the evaluation. I think that the problem with eliminating the use of the Route 8 corridor completely, just foreclosing that, without at least putting a number on it, because that's really a political decision. Frankly, it's not an engineering decision. DOT is going to say no. I know DOT is going to say no, but it has to be someone else's decision. And it has to be a
Yes.
political decision if it happens. I mean, look, if it is cost effective, if the number to go along Route 8 from Beacon Falls to Naugatuck is, a tenth, a 20th of the number you're talking to go over the mountain, then, that's worth having the political discussion above DOT. And, we do highway design, we do highway planning. I honestly can't find a compelling reason not to put a sewer pipe in a highway right of way. Could you just, is it possible that you guys could still put a per mile or a per foot number on something like that without a deep dive into it, just to give us a order of magnitude comparison for that?
Absolutely. We can provide that information. We can provide you a cost for Route 1 and Route 2 planning level costs. We can provide that information, absolutely. And it will be significant. But we absolutely have that information. We have that information to crunch out some numbers, Rick.
All right. So you're going to Naugatuck to Beacon Falls to Seymour. Just we want to see what those are. That's all.
Yep. We can come up with that.
My question,
Mario,
go ahead.
Jim here from Naugatuck.
Hey,
Can you
Jim.
bring back up the two options from Beacon Falls? Okay, I tend to agree with you, though. The two routes you picked don't make any sense because they would be way too expensive. I agree that the route on Route 8 is a political decision and not really a engineering decision because it's probably the best route. And we already have some sewers in there right of way going along there, which we discussed. The other option would be crossing where Route 1 and 2 intersect at the river. There's a old Route 8 corridor, which is up the hill basically, where the retaining wall is. So there's a potential that you could cross at that location, tunnel underneath the river, underneath Route 8, and I'm not sure quite where that old right-of-way is, and be off the right-of-way of Route 8 and proceed to Cross Street in that direction. So if you needed to use the right-of-way, it wouldn't be really that long a portion. But you can see that coming down Route 8. Down Androsco Drive, it just climbs up along the mountain. Basically, it's the old goat trail that leads you to Beacon Falls.
Yeah, I would just note, we probably don't even need to tunnel. I mean, if the decision were ever made to allow us to use Route 8, we could probably hang it off of the bridge that crosses.
Yeah, but if you wanted to limit, I'm just saying, if you wanted to limit your Route 8 usage, you'd follow that first section of Route 1, and then you could cross over.
We're in agreement.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Mike-
Sure, we can look at that a little more. And Jim, we wanted this to work. The discussions that we had with you, we wanted it to work. When it started looking bad, we said we want to tell Jim now. We don't want to have him hear this at the workshop. And we, quite honestly, as you know, Jim, the information that you shared with us, and I did say thank you by email, but I'll say it now here in person or virtually in person. That information there further made our conclusion even stronger, because the manual that I spoke of, we were able to identify that, through some of the information that you sent us. The manual states that longitudinal utility installations is just not permitted, except for strict cases where there are no other options.
Well, sounds like
So-
a $50 million pipe falls into that no other option category.
That was my question
We'll
on
look at
Eversource
that.
too. As far as Eversource saying no other alternative, well, you got one there. my question is real quick, Mario, because we are burning up time.
Yep.
But
Yep.
it's related to Rick's, not unsurprisingly, that you ruled out the right of ways for the ones we're just talking about, Beacon Falls and Naugatuck. Were all the right of ways looked into regarding the ones that you see are more feasible regarding the three lower towns, Seymour, Ansonia, Derby, because you had routes going through there, but I'm curious about the right of ways that were incurred there.
Yeah, we pretty much stayed away from common right-of-ways further south. We felt that we're going to let the costs that we will develop in Task 3 speak to those, but we wanted to provide routes that were implementable. So I think that the routes that we've identified going south from Seymour to Ansonia and from Ansonia to Derby are routes that are feasible. What we would look at next time is we would take a peek at what's in those streets, what type of utilities are already in those streets, and how we would do that work. But we'd recommend just staying away from any other utility corridor if we can help, if we can do it.
So Mario, are you saying that on those southern routes, you're anticipating using existing pipes?
Using existing streets, not using existing pipes. Rather than putting them in for instance, along a green space along the river, or putting it in along the highway. Don't do that for those routes, but just looks like it's connecting. Did I lose you guys?
No.
No.
Okay. Looks like something is happening now. Okay. Yeah, looked like my
Picture's
computer was
frozen,
acting up. Yeah, I think, so we're not using existing pipes, Rick, using existing streets and that, because I think it's better off if we stay away from the highway, stay away from the river, stay away from the railroad altogether, because we can, and it's a good way to do it, to just stay away from those. It's just that we couldn't. I mean, those were very attractive to us going north, but then it's just not feasible for the reasons we said.
Mario, we no longer have your video or your desk. We only have your audio on the phone.
Just give us a minute.
I mean, if you need a little time, we could jump to the Collins Center and have them do their part, and then we'll come back to you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right. So do you need desktop, Sarah or David?
Sorry, I was muted. Okay, thanks, Sarah, for putting that up. Everybody can see our slide there. The Collins Center's been around for about a dozen years now. We were created by the Massachusetts legislature with a public service mission. We're housed at the McCormick Graduate School of Public Policy and Global Studies at UMass Boston. We have done municipal projects, make up most of our work. We've completed hundreds, 700 plus it says here, for more than a couple of hundred municipalities, regional government, state agencies, mostly in Massachusetts, but we've also done work in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire. Our mission is to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, governance, responsiveness, and accountability of public sector organizations, particularly focused on state and local government. Sarah, can you? Thanks. So we have many practitioners who work at the center with decades of experience working in municipal and state governments, and we're bringing a team of them to this project. We will be looking at regional governance structures and cost sharing models for your project. We'll facilitate organizational change from a legal and political perspective. We'll be doing a financial cost benefit analysis, and we of course bring a sensitivity to local control and issues of representation and equity. Our team, I'll be leading the team. I have 35 years of experience in local government from, in fact, my first project in local government was managing a sewer system evaluation survey back in the early 1980s. So I've done this kind of work myself in the past, but I've led towns. I've been a town administrator, and I've been a public works professional over that 35 years. So I've done rate studies. I've participated in construction of sewer facilities, and I've done regionalization projects. Over 35 years in local government, you name it, I've probably been involved in some way or another. Sarah, I am gonna rely on you to talk about the rest of the team, because
All right, I can do
okay,
that, David. Thank
thanks.
you. As David said, he will be the lead contact for the Collins Center, and I will be joining him at many of the meetings and working closely with him. I have been with the Collins Center for 8 years. Right now, I manage our financial management and municipal operations practice area. David and I work together on many different projects, mostly capital planning projects, water and sewer and public works, management operations studies, organizational structure issues and things like that. Supporting the two of us, and these folks you may not see, but you might hear their names, are 4 of our colleagues from the Collins Center. Marilyn Contras and Dick Kobayashi are our experts in governance structures and legal, the legal aspects of regional models. Mike Paxtis is another one of our public works associates, and he'll be providing support as needed. And Mr. Jim Tarr is going to be providing data analytics and research support as needed.
Thanks, Sarah. So our role in the project, we will be recommending governance models for the preferred alternatives. We will be drafting bylaws that define the representation model and the wholesale rate setting procedures. We'll be doing a complete cost benefit analysis that shows the capital and operation and maintenance costs in the regional model compared with the base cost for each jurisdiction. And we'll be contributing that information to the EIE. Later on this year, probably early fall, late summer, early fall, we'll begin to conduct interviews and up to 3 workshops with stakeholders to begin discussing these kinds of governance issues and rate methodologies and so forth. Of course, that will require coordinate closely with Naugatuck-Valley Council of Governments and Black and Veatch. So we're excited to be on this project. It's going to be a lot of fun for us.
Thank you very much, David and Sarah. The reason we brought them into this particular workshop is that the Collins Center is going to be, once the short list is even shorter, or we get closer to the finalists, they're going to be reaching out to some of the same people on this Zoom meeting at the moment. So we wanted to give them a chance to introduce themselves, tell the tasks that we've commissioned them to do. As much as Black & Veatch's engineering work and some of the cost analysis is important, as is the tasks we've given the Collins Center, because we'd have to come up with, to put the study completely through to what we intend, we have to have the governance model, an example of how a regional entity would work, and the cost benefit. That's a much deeper economic analysis on how it would impact the towns, how it would impact mill rates, how it would impact sewer fees. All that stuff has to be included that Black & Veatch is not tasked with, but we were very happy that we found the Collins Center. They are actively involved in one study involved in Connecticut property tax at the moment. They're very familiar with what we're going to be assigning them to do. And any questions that anyone has for them, please put them forward now.
I think that we can suffice to say that the reason we've brought in Collins for the town's benefits is we're assuming that no matter what combination recommendation we may come up with, if you decide to proceed, you're probably going to have to go to referendum depending upon the setup in your town. This will give you the kind of deep information about how it would operate, how ratepayers are going to be represented, and what that structure, that overall governing and operating structure would be. So I think that kind of covers it, but does anyone from the towns have a question about the governance study piece?
I do. It's the same one I always ask. How long is that going to take?
Well, they're going to follow up when B&V is complete. They're going to work while Black & Veatch is working, but primarily when we get to the 2 or 3 final options, they're going to work on that. And pardon me, Sarah and David, if I misspeak on your scope, but they're going to evaluate a couple of the final options so that we can put numbers to those.
All right. So again, what are we talking about for the end line here?
Well, we're as Rick said, we have to follow along Black & Veatch's work. We can't get ahead of Black & Veatch. So
Right.
assuming their schedule is, what their schedule is, we'll be following right behind them. We're looking at wrapping up our portion of this in, the middle of the spring of 2021.
And Mario, I mean, do you want to just comment now on where you think you are to the end of your study?
Yes, the coming out of task 2, we've already started on task 3 work, and we'll be at the end of our task 3, as we talked 2 or 3 weeks ago, by pretty much the middle to late part of December, which will, before the holidays, will be done and done with task 3. And then at that information, I think the Collins Center will have some good information to start, chewing on and munching on, and we'll be, at that point, we will be developing the recommended alternative. But there won't be an additional analysis. We'll be developing the alternative at that point.
Okay. So
I'm sorry, and just so you don't get the wrong idea, we will be able to do some work with you in the communities prior to Black & Veatch finishing in December, laying the groundwork, talking about different methodologies for wholesale rates, and talking about different governance models and comparable regional systems that are out there. So we'll get a spade in the ground and start turning the soil over for you well before the end of the year.
I see George and Stella are on here. I just want to make sure that they're comfortable and they understand, because all these things delay what we have to do. And I'm just speaking for Derby now, selfishly, but we need to find an end line here.
Yeah, we're all set. We understand where you are with that, Jack.
Okay. We have to keep moving. We're trying to do our best, but this does slow us down. maybe to our benefit. So I'm open about that. But it just got to be, also open that it does hinder us.
Should always feel free to blame me, Jack.
No, I'm not blaming you.
No, I want you to.
I understand how complicated it is, and you haven't found a city more cooperative in doing this work than Derby.
I don't pick sides, but thank you. Mario, we have about 25 minutes to wrap this up. So if you can try and get through the rest of your presentation and leave enough time for questions, that would be great.
Okay, great. So where we left off before those technical difficulties is these are the regional alternatives that we're left with after the conveyance corridor evaluation, and then the discussion that Jim Stewart and you, Rick, were bringing up about the route through Old Route 8. We're going to get with Jim, make sure that we understand exactly what that route is. And it may be already pretty close to what we already have, but we'll take those particulars in mind and we'll develop an approximate budgetary cost for you, because that's what you're interested in. Okay? All right, so that's my understanding of what we're going to do, what we've agreed to do. All right, so let's go to the next slide here. Let's see. Okay. All right. So we're dealing with the plants right now. We did some flows and loads update. We did a lot of work in treatment capacity assessment that's in the appendix, as well as the flows and loads update, and then we're going to show you the site layouts. So per what you said, Rick, we'll cover this as quickly as we can without losing us. So basically, it had been a while since we ended phase 1 and we began phase 2. A good year or more went by. So what we did was we went back to the flows and loads. We had information through the end of 2017. We had 2 more years, 2018 and 2019, that we did not have flows and loads for. So we collected flows and loads from all the communities. We did not for Beacon Falls, and so we updated the flows and loads, is what I'm saying, with 2018, 2019, and through March of 2020. And we made some adjustments to the flows and loads for Derby and Sonia and Seymour as a result of that. And these are the flows that we have. I would also point out that a little bit over a month ago, we also were talking with Derby, and we know that their engineer the engineer and the city have gotten together and have taken a look at the future forecast for growth in the city, and it was determined that the growth projections now are even less than the growth projections 3 to 5 years ago. And so the flows and loads that we're showing here for Derby, we're going to look at what those flows and loads are that they've come up with, and we may adjust these flows and loads downward again going into task 3 because of the new work that they've done. I'm not saying that we will, but we are going to review what they did to fully understand it, and the numbers for Derby may go down further because it's this information that's critical to us in identifying plant sizing. So in the capacity assessment for the treatment plants, what we did was we looked at the ability of these existing plants to handle their own individual situation, i.e. the base case, and then the combined flows which are needed for regionalization. And what we took a look at in this assessment, we took a look at the parts of a treatment plant that have the greatest need for land area. And those processes that are associated with primary treatment and for secondary treatment. You might say, what else is there? Well, there's sludge processing, there's preliminary treatment, there's disinfection. We did not take any of that into account in this assessment. However, we will be prescribing costs for those in task 3 when we develop our cost model. What we're looking at here is we said, can these plant sites handle the treatment that's required, not only for themselves, but for these regional alternatives? Again, if the answer was no, then those regional alternatives would fall away. We took a look at treatment intensification for constrained sites. So we're going to get into that here in a minute, and then we'll get into the layouts themselves. So bear with me just a little bit. Not going to go into this too deep because I don't want to lose anybody, but we took a look at treatment intensification in these areas. So some acronyms. Remember CEPT, C-E-P-T, chemically enhanced primary treatment. What does that do? That allows us to handle higher flows by increasing surface overflow rates to primary clarifiers. That's a good thing when you don't have a lot of space. Ballasted activated sludge, also called biomag, basically by the addition of a magnetite, which is an inert iron ore, that's going to allow us to enhance settling. You might say, so what? The reason for so what is that it also allows us to get more settling in a given space. That's a good thing. And then we've got this other acronym, IFAS, which is integrated fixed film. That uses a plastic media to basically increase sludge inventory into a plant. That also allows us to shrink the footprint of an aeration tank or a bioreactor. Okay, 3 slides. I promise we won't go into this for too deeply, but we've got chemically enhanced primary treatment slide right here. We've got the primary clarifier over to the left. Basically what it is a settling device. If we add that chemical that's identified in red off to the left in the raw wastewater, some chemical coagulant, we can increase the throughput through that primary clarifier with the same size unit. That graph on the right, don't study it too deeply, but what it's showing performance on the y-axis, and what you can see with the conventional process, if we don't use CEPT, the performance drops as the settling rate increases, as the overflow rate increases. But with CEPT, we can maintain the performance while also increasing the surface overflow rate. And with CEPT, we could increase the primary clarifier capacity by approximately 3 times, and that's safely, and perhaps even more, but that would need further study, but certainly 3 times. And then with conventional activated sludge, again, taking a look at these 2 reactors, we've got the reactor over to the left, which is the aeration tank, and we've got the settler here on the right. They work together, and bioreactors and secondary clarifiers are treated as one unit when engineers size secondary treatment. With IFAS, what we're doing is, as I said before, we're adding this plastic media into the aeration tank, and that means we can do more treatment with the same volume of aeration tank as we would, and as we could. If we don't put the media in, we need more tankage, and that would put some of these treatment sites off, make some of these treatment sites off limits to us. With ballasted activated sludge or biomag, we can increase the settling rate that means the clarifier space, we can do a lot more with clarifiers if we use biomag. So with biomag, we can take advantage of the same clarifier. With IFAS, we can take advantage of aeration tanks. I'm giving you this in real rapid fire mode, I understand. So I'm going to have Will review what the base case and the regional alternatives look like for the treatment plants. Will, you want to do that?
Okay, so I know we don't have a whole lot of time here. I'll try not to rush, but we'll certainly try to get through everything. So as Mario mentioned, what we looked at is ways to utilize these plant sites to the best of their abilities without having to expand them too much. And in some cases, that resulted in some intensification options to utilize that existing infrastructure. But where we did have space, we didn't necessarily go straight to intensification simply because those processes can be more costly, especially from an O&M standpoint. So looking at Derby for the base case, at the 2040 build-out, we've identified enhancements needed at the primary treatment, and without adding a primary settling tank to accomplish that, we have identified SEPT to optimize the existing tankage there. And then the only other upgrade that we've recognized at this time is actually upgrading an existing MLE tank that they have there, which is inoperable currently, and that would meet their 2040 needs just as Derby on its own. So looking at the first alternative, you can see immediately that some additional increases to the secondary process would be required. So on the left would be with biomag, and as Mario mentioned, that utilizes aeration basin volume to meet treatment requirements. And then IFAS on the right, that would utilize the existing tankage, but would require an additional secondary tank. And so this is the Derby plus Ansonia alternative. And you'll see that the Derby plus Seymour alternative is identical as far as conceptual layouts here. They have, Seymour and Ansonia have very similar flows, and so that didn't surprise us at all. Looking at the combined case of Derby plus Ansonia and Seymour, so 3-plant regionalization alternative here, you can see that even with biomag, we'd have to add a secondary clarifier. We're also identifying the need for an additional aeration basin with an increase to the existing aeration basins. And so you can see that it's starting to get a little bit more involved, but from a concept standpoint, we're still staying within the parcel boundaries, which is very promising. With IFAS, we believe that we can still get away with the existing tankage from the BNR side, but that we would need to add 2 secondary clarifiers. And so between these 2 alternatives, it's kind of a question of how close can we get to the railroad, how close can we get to that highway embankment, what kind of geotechnical retaining walls and things like that might be required. And those are the kinds of things that we'll look at as a part of Task 3. So I'm moving ahead into Ansonia here, moving north to south. South to north here. So Ansonia as a base case, we've determined that the plant has adequate treatment capacity for its 2040 build-out, so no improvements are required there. For the Ansonia plus Derby regional alternative, because Derby doesn't have phosphorus limits, taking flow up to Ansonia increases the phosphorus load to the Naugatuck River. And so we're anticipating that an additional phosphorus treatment facility would be required for this alternative. And in addition to that, an additional primary settling tank is identified, which would allow the solids treatment without SEPT. And so that's kind of an infrastructure versus operation trade-off that we've identified for this case. We've also identified the probability for having to increase the UV facility from a hydraulic standpoint. But again, that's something that we'll take a closer look at as a part of Task 3. For the Ansonia plus Seymour alternative, because Seymour has a phosphorus limit, that would be combined with Ansonia, and so that would not require an additional phosphorus treatment facilities as far as we can tell in our analysis performed in Task 2, and that we would just need to add a primary settling tank to handle that additional treatment. And again, that would be, that could be accomplished with SEPT with their existing tanks, but we believe that additional infrastructure would be a more reasonable cost in the long term. Now for the Ansonia plus Derby and Seymour regional alternative, you can see that quite a bit more involved here. We would anticipate that the expansion of the UV facility, an additional phosphorus treatment would be anticipated with Derby's added flow. And then we're also anticipating adding a primary tank and SEPT to meet those primary treatment requirements, and then adding a secondary clarifier on the tail end. So the site, you can see, starts to become more involved as far as adding some of these facilities. These are the improvements that we'll be dialing in as a part of Task 3. So finally, looking at Seymour here, this would be we talked about Beacon Falls bringing that flow down from the north. And although that doesn't appear cost effective, we took a quick look to see what might be required. And really the base case for Seymour's build out to 2040 or taking Beacon Falls flow through to 2040, the improvements are the same. Some enhancements to primary settling. We've identified SEPT here, but there might be some other side stream options that could meet treatment requirements. And then adding a secondary clarifier, which they actually have space for, that was built into their site plan when the plant was originally built. So between those two, although Beacon Falls doesn't appear promising, either way, it appears that the 2040 build-out requirements would be the same. So I know I kind of rushed through that. Were there any questions on the site layouts?
No, you did a great job. Thank you. I'm wondering if any of the plant operators or engineers or WPCA people have any questions about any of those alternatives. I'm sure we can go back and take a look.
Hi, everyone. This is Edward Abel with the City of Derby, WPCA. Can everybody hear me okay?
We got you.
Well, I just wanted to run something by everyone. It might be a long shot, but I figured I might as well ask now. I'll try to make it as quick as possible because I know we're under time restraints. As most of you know, the City of Derby is looking at both a facilities plant upgrade as well as a regionalizational study. And as we were looking at our own facilities upgrade, one of the highest costs associated with it is being able to run our facility while building a new facility around it. So that got me thinking recently about looking at different locations, possibly building another plant at a different location. In doing so, one of the things that was intriguing to me is a great parcel of land on North Division Street, which is not far off from where the plant is right now. And one of the benefits to that is that Ansonia is located a little bit higher up on North Division Street as well. So that got me thinking about a regionalization look to building a new facility while maintaining both facilities at the same time, lower the cost.
Will, can you take us back to the Ansonia plant layout? So Ed, you're talking about in reference to this site, you would be talking south of this site, or you're talking about the area north?
Let me see.
I believe he's talking about the road to nowhere.
Yes, behind BJ. So that would be north?
Oh, he's talking about on the Derby side.
Correct.
Which I believe the city just sold.
There are pieces that have been sold. We have been talking, I've been talking with some of the people in the city. They did sell a piece, but they might be willing, or those people might look into reselling it back, might consider a land swap. There's a couple different alternatives, but there is still land down further closer to the back of Home Depot, closer to Route 34, that could be a possible option as well. And this would take out a lot of the size requirements associated with either one of the plants being undersized.
So I would just invite Drew or Jack to comment. Is that are those the type? Is that an option that you think we should be pursuing before we even get to the engineering feasibility?
So Rick, I actually unfortunately walked away. I just heard the tail end of what Ed said. I had to go let a vendor in the door downstairs since we're close to the public. So I heard the tail end of what he said about a possible land swap and things like that. Is that what the question is?
He's talking about locating a brand new plant somewhere along the Road B site.
You know, based on the fact that we have a development that was just approved down there, and I know you're familiar with it as well, it would be probably a hard sell to get back the private developer's hands. And I know there's some other area down there, but between and some of the other challenges down there, I think it would be a difficult thing to execute. And I actually would defer to both Jack and you, Rick. Rick, you're way more familiar with the area and the adjacent train station and things like that than I am with my 2 years here. I know you've been involved in that area for a long time, so I'd be interested to hear your opinion and Jack's opinion.
Well, Rick knows a lot more about it than I do. I think it would be tough. I really do.
Hello?
But, you know, again, I would got to people who have a lot more expertise than I do. I don't know how big the parcels are. And again, I don't know how cost effective it would be in the long run.
Walter, were you trying to speak? Okay, you must be talking to someone else. I think the question that Ed raises is a good question, which is whether it makes any sense to establish a new plant on, something under 10 acres available. It's actually a piece of land between the Ansonia and Derby plants along the flood control levee. How much more do I have to pay you, Mario, if you study that?
Yeah, I think you all need to decide whether that should be brought into the mix. But right now, Ed, just very quickly to you, at least coming out of Task 2, yes, the Derby plant site is small, but we have found a way at Task 2 level to let the Derby plant site accept, with the flows and loads that are identified, the Ansonia flows and even the Seymour flows. It's certainly not, it's getting pretty tight, but is it doable? Yes, it's doable. At what cost? That's the question that we would be answering in Task 3, along with some of the other facility needs. As I identified before, we did not address sludge processing, we did not address pumping, which I think in Phase 1 we identified very clearly as those facilities are going to need some significant upgrade too. But it could work. So on the minus side, there'll be costs associated with that. On the plus side, it's good because one of the things that we had said in Phase 1, if you go back to those documents, to get rid of the digesters. But I'm not saying that we will say in Task 3 to retain the digesters, but because the plant is now significantly bigger, the plant that we're looking at here on the slide with Derby plus Ansonia and Seymour, we can actually make use of those anaerobic digesters and basically get some energy recovery from them to substantially reduce the electrical cost, the electrical power cost that would be associated with O&M. But we'd have to look at that right balance. We'd have to look at
my question, I realize you're at task 2, but Ed's point was that there might be some operational issues during the expansion, a proposed expansion of the Derby plant. Now, have you, I realize it's task 2, but have you guys looked at those transitional possibilities of being able to fully operate and process effluent while you're upgrading a plant? Is that part of the feasibility assessment at this point?
We're going to be looking at that at task 3. There's no question that operations and construction are going to have to coexist. We can't shut the sewer off and just do construction. So the point that Ed made was spot on. We think that it's possible, but again, at what cost? That's what the sequencing that we would ultimately develop in task 4 would identify. But even in task 3, we're going to be looking at that sequencing. How does this work? How does the construction work while making this plant continue to run and meet permit?
So I want to introduce one other idea and question here while we're looking at the regional alternatives for Seymour, Ansonia, and Derby. Has Black and Veatch looked at going through with the Ansonia plant to combine all 3, but then to continue to discharge the effluent into the Housatonic River through Derby, basically eliminating the phosphorus requirements on the Ansonia site and using the existing pipes that run almost completely from Ansonia to Derby?
Yes, we did. The treatment requirements would be essentially the same as we've identified here on this slide, but the phosphorus treatment may either go away entirely or be greatly reduced, Rick. Okay, so these facilities that we've identified, the facilities that are shown here on this slide would be the ones that if we bring back the treated effluent back to the Housatonic and discharge it at the outfall location where Derby is discharging now. However, the treatment facilities here, we would need to take a closer look at what those exactly mean. It might, this baby blue box might go away in its entirety or be substantially reduced. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I'm just asking if that is still in the mix, this option.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. Basically, this is what came out of the treatment plant layout and treatment assessment and layout task or subtask, that all of these would be in the mix. Derby to Ansonia, Derby to Ansonia with the effluent pump to Housatonic River, which is what you just asked. Derby and Ansonia to Derby and Seymour to Ansonia, Derby and Seymour to Ansonia with the effluent pump to the Housatonic. There it is again. And then, of course, the Ansonia to Derby, Seymour, Ansonia to Derby, and Seymour to Ansonia, and part of Ansonia to Derby. That we're going to look at that one a little closer here in task 3. This could actually be a phasing of item 10, or alternative 10 could be a phased version of 9. And the one that would drop away is Derby to Seymour and to Ansonia, where part of the flow from Derby would go to Seymour and part of the flow would go to Ansonia. We felt that there was no need for that alternative to continue to stay in the mix because there's already capacity at the Ansonia plant to handle Derby. So why send part of it up to Seymour?
Why is, first, let me just, alternatives 3 and 4 would also require Seymour to still upgrade at its base case. Is that correct? And then on alternative 8, is that really worth pursuing still, Ansonia to Derby?
Yes, yeah, we absolutely, I think, yeah, coming out of task 3 will answer that. It may, cost effectively, we don't know the answer, but it's feasible. We just don't know at what cost. And the cost is what's going to either let it sink or stay afloat.
So how, in that analysis, how are you going to evaluate the I guess the opportunity cost, the loss cost of the investment of facilities you're abandoning? I mean, I could make that case on any of these options, but in the case of any plan that would shut down Ansonia, how are you going to include the loss of that more recent investment to the ratepayers?
Yeah, I haven't figured out how we'll do that, but we're going to do that. We're going to have to take into account that there's still capital value there. And again, we're looking at 20 years into the future. That facility is getting old now, and it'll be older by the time our study is done, but we will recognize that there is a sunk value there that is higher than at the other locations, Rick.
Yeah, because the ratepayers would still be paying off that plant for another.
That's right.
Brian will know, but maybe another 10 years.
Approximately 10 years.
Thank you. All right. Are you onto your near final slides, Mario?
Very, very close. So basically, the short list of regional alternatives that came out of Task 2 are these ones that we've identified, these 7. We will go back and take a look at that request that you and Jim Stewart have asked us for. We'll put that in and we'll give you that information as well. And basically, just looking ahead into Task 3, there's no mystery here, but basically we've got the funnel diagram here on the right, where we've gone from 23 regional alternatives down to 7 regional alternatives, and the mission for Task 3 is to go from 7 regional alternatives down to 1, or at most 2 if there's a draw. We'd like 1, but I'm not saying that there will be 2, but we're prepared for that. And then we'll be developing those further. We'll be developing the 6 further so that we can provide a good cost model. Again, still planning level, but we want to provide a good cost model, and then we'll compare those regional alternatives against each other using cost, but also non-cost reasons, and come up with a recommendation. That's the end of our presentation for today.
John?
Any questions from anyone that on any aspect of what we've discussed today? Hearing none, thank everyone.
One quick one. What's required of us, the individual towns, for the next few months?
Continued cooperation with the engineers and with the Collins Center when they start to reach out. They'll need some contacts in the towns as well. Mario, I forget what we're doing. Are we publishing this study on our website now, and this workshop document?
This document, or the findings, the draft findings that we all distributed to everyone, is currently on NVCOG's website. This that was just finished this morning, we can certainly put up on it as well. But the Task 2 memo is on our website right now. We just got this half an hour before the presentation, but this can be on our website today as well.
George, Stella, is there anything you guys need?
No, I think we're all set. Thanks, Rick.
Yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, everyone looks good. No one looks anxious to speak. I want to thank all of you for participating today. John will continue to be in touch with you as we go through each step. And Mario, if we can almost follow up as a separate matter on that order of magnitude on
Yep.
the Naugatuck Beacon Falls. And if you want, I can arrange for us to have the district take us out onto the right of way so that we can look at it if you want to do it in person.
Okay, sounds good. And we'll be getting with all the towns, Jack, we'll be getting with you and Ed and certainly with Brian and Walter, just as we start stepping into task 3, just to make sure that there are things that you feel are also critical that we'll take into account in our analysis, because we'll want to continue working closely so that we can better define these facilities.
All right. I know that Jim Galligan was on the call, and I know Anne Marie is probably doing 3 meetings at once, but she's listening. Is there anything more you need from Seymour in terms of plant operations or access, Mario?
No, I think Walter's been extremely helpful to us. Jim had asked some questions, and we'll be providing him some answers to some of his questions too. Okay, that's
Great.
all we've got. Thanks for your time. Very much
Thank you everyone for
appreciate it.
attending. We really appreciate the input and being part of it. And we will certainly, as Rick mentioned, we'll be in touch going forward.
All right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care, folks.